The ultimatum had been read into the record at the 9th hour of the assembly session, and by the time the chamber's environmental systems cycled to the next temperature setting, every senior member of the Terran diplomatic staff had already left the building. Not because they had been ordered out, because they had been told, politely, and with the full weight of Star League procedural authority, that the assembly did not negotiate with representatives below the grade of senior envoy, and that until the Terran Confederation produced one, the chamber's business with humanity was concluded. The senior envoy was currently aboard a League transport under what the Assembly's communications office was calling precautionary protective custody. The two deputy envoys had been escorted from the premises 3 hours earlier, their credentials suspended pending the outcome of what the Assembly's floor leader, a broad-shouldered Varanthi named Dorek San, kept calling a final opportunity for reason. That left Sora Vance. She was 24 years old and held the rank of military attaché, 3rd grade. She was technically below the threshold for floor access under the Star League's own protocols, which was why nobody had bothered to escort her out. She had a folding chair, a comms tablet with a cracked upper corner, and a seat in the observer's gallery that looked down over the full breadth of the assembly floor. 319 delegates from 41 member species arranged in concentric rings around the central speaking platform, and above it all, through the wide glass panels of the chamber's vaulted roof, the Assembly's orbital station, and 2 of its standing warships visible in the amber afternoon sky like nails in a board. The ultimatum was straightforward. The Terran Confederation had 72 hours to withdraw all vessels from the Orvith Corridor transit lanes and issue a formal acknowledgement that those lanes fell under Star League jurisdiction. If no withdrawal was confirmed, the Assembly would authorize its combined fleet to enforce the claim by whatever means the fleet commander deemed appropriate. The vote to authorize that language had passed 291 to 28. Sora had listened to it read. She had written it down in longhand on the back of a mission briefing sheet because her tablet's voice capture function had stopped working 4 hours ago, which was 4 hours into the session, and well before she had understood she would be the only person left to hear the rest of it. She had then sent a message to Mission Command on the secure channel that still worked. Ultimatum issued. 72 hours. SR envoy in custody. Deputies expelled. I am alone in gallery, awaiting instructions. Mission Command had replied 40 minutes later, hold. Do not leave the building. So she held. She pulled out her tablet, opened the Transit Authority Statutes archive, and started reading from the beginning. The first 6 hours passed in procedural motion. The Assembly debated the enforcement language in 3 separate subcommittee structures, each of which had to be convened and recorded before the full floor could resume. Sora listened from the gallery, taking notes in the margins of everything she had with her. She learned that 3 of the 41-member delegations had abstained on the vote rather than supporting it outright: the Rathai bloc, the independent Selhari representative, and the 2-seat Dorvan delegation, who had a long-standing trade relationship with Terran freight operators and had been conspicuously quiet throughout the session. She noted their names. She noted the row in which they sat and the precise angle from which they would be visible from the central speaking platform. At the 7th hour, a floor aide approached the gallery railing and looked up at her. The Assembly does not permit overnight observation by non-credentialed personnel, the aide said. His Terran standard was stiff but functional. I'm credentialed, Sora said. She showed him her attaché's ID chip. He looked at it, he looked at her, he withdrew. She slept in the chair for 90 minutes, woke when the chamber's lights shifted from working amber to the dim maintenance spectrum, and spent the next 3 hours reading the Star League's Transit Authority statutes on her tablet, specifically the sections the Assembly's floor leader had cited as the legal basis for the corridor claim. She found 4 discrepancies between the cited statute numbers and their actual content. She wrote them down in the margins carefully, cross-referencing each one against the primary text twice before she marked it as confirmed. At the 13th hour, another message arrived from Mission Command. Situation being escalated. Terran fleet assets being repositioned as contingency. Do not leave the building. She noted the time and wrote, "Understood." She did not ask what repositioned meant. She had a fair idea. She also had a clear idea of what the Assembly's combined fleet would do if it received confirmation of Terran fleet movement before anyone in this chamber had spoken to her. At the 16th hour, Dorek-san descended from the floor to the lower observation corridor, presumably to make a point, and looked through the glass partition at her. He was tall even for a Varanthi, with the banded coloration across his cranial plates that indicated seniority in his species' institutional hierarchy. He wore the Assembly's ceremonial sash, which meant he considered himself still on the record, even in a corridor outside the chamber proper. Sora stood up when she saw him. He spoke to her through the partition intercom. "The Confederation has sent no replacement envoy." "No," she said. "You are aware the 72-hour period is running." "Yes." He studied her for a moment. His secondary eyelids tracked independently of his primary ones, a reading behavior in Varanthi she had learned, not a threat display. "You have something to say." It was not a question. She had been in the gallery for 16 hours. He had noticed. "I have several things to say," Sora told him, "but I'm not cleared to say them to you in a corridor. I'd need floor access." A long pause. "The Assembly does not convene floor sessions for third-grade attachés." "Then that's the Assembly's choice," she said. She sat back down. He stood there for another 10 seconds, then he left. The floor aide came by twice more in the next 2 hours with offers she did not accept, and a different aide appeared at the 21st hour to tell her that the full Assembly intended to resume formal session in the morning, as though this were a piece of information she might find disorienting. She thanked him and went back to her notes. At the 22nd hour, she was granted provisional speaking access. The motion was introduced by the Rathai bloc, and passed by a narrow margin after the Selhari representative added a procedural note that the Assembly's own charter required it to receive any formal representation from a recognized party before the enforcement clock expired, and that a third-grade attaché was, strictly speaking, a recognized party under Section 9 of the membership protocols. Sora walked down from the gallery. She took the speaking platform. 319 delegates looked at her from their concentric rings. Through the glass panels above, the 2 warships were still visible in the afternoon sky, catching the amber light at an angle that made them look larger than they were. She placed her notes on the platform surface. "I'm not here to negotiate the corridor claim," she said. Her voice carried cleanly to the upper tiers. "I'm here to note 4 errors in the statutory basis for the ultimatum. Not arguments, errors. The citations don't match the statutes they claim to be drawing from." She read them. She read them in the same flat, precise cadence she would have used for transit jump coordinates. No editorial weight, no pausing for effect, no reading the room. She simply read the discrepancy between what the floor leader had cited and what the text actually said, 4 times in sequence. The chamber was very quiet by the time she finished. "The practical result," she continued, "is that the enforcement authorization may not be legally sustainable under the Star League's own charter. I would expect at least 3 member delegations to raise that issue before any fleet action is executed, which means any action taken in the next 50 hours would likely be challenged internally before it reached the fleet commander's desk." She looked up from her notes. "That's not a threat. That's a procedural observation." Dorek-san was on his feet before she finished the sentence. "The attaché has no standing to interpret League statutes from this floor." "I'm not interpreting," Sora said. "I'm reading. The floor is welcome to check my citations against the original texts." The next 18 hours were the longest of her life, and also the most ordinary. She was not removed from the floor. She was not given a chair either. She stood at the platform, or she didn't stand at all, and so she stood, stepping aside when delegates requested time and stepping back when they finished. The assembly did not pause its session. It ran straight through the night and into the following morning, because once the Ratha block formally moved that the statutory questions be reviewed before the enforcement clock expired, the session could not technically adjourn. That provision was also in the charter, in a section that had apparently been written by whoever had decided that a star polity rushing to war without reading its own founding documents was a sufficiently plausible failure mode to legislate against. 3 of the 4 statute citations checked out under review, 1 did not. A transit authority precedent that the Assembly's floor leader had used as the enforcement authorization's primary jurisdictional hook had been superseded by a later amendment, a document that his legal team had not located in their research. It was a small error in a very large body of law. But when the Assembly's own legal staff confirmed the supersession in open session, the chamber went quiet in a particular way. The way a body goes quiet not from ceremony or respect, but from the simple problem of not knowing what to say next. Sara was still standing at the platform. She said nothing. She had learned, somewhere in the past year of watching rooms full of people absorb information they had not anticipated, that the moment after a chamber took in something it did not want to take in was not a moment for more words. It was a moment for waiting. The room would do the work if you let it. The Dorvan delegation's senior representative raised his hand and requested a recess. The Selhari representative seconded it without waiting to be acknowledged. Dorek-san sat for a long time with his secondary eyelids moving before he recognized the request. They recessed for 4 hours. When the assembly reconvened, the enforcement clock showed 29 hours remaining. They did not vote to rescind the ultimatum. What they voted for instead, after 6 more hours of floor debate that Sara listened to from the speaking platform, still standing, having declined the aide's second offer of a chair on the grounds that she was technically still presenting, was a 60-day review period during which the legal questions around the transit authority statutes would be formally resolved, and during which the enforcement deadline would be suspended pending that resolution. The language could be described almost any way, depending on who was describing it and to whom. The Star League's communications office would probably call it a procedural pause. The Assembly's floor record would describe it as a charter compliance measure. Dorek-san, in his formal statement at the close of the session, characterized it as the Assembly's commitment to precision in the application of its own foundational law. He did not characterize it as the Assembly blinking first. Sara sent Mission Command 2 messages in rapid succession. The first, enforcement suspended, 60-day review authorized, advise fleet repositioning be paused pending review. The second, 7 seconds later, SR envoy release should be requested immediately per Charter Section 14. Then she stood on the floor of the Star League Assembly chamber and felt, more than anything else, tired. Her feet ached from the platform surface. She had eaten 2 ration bars from her jacket pocket and drunk water from the corridor fountain during recesses, and done nothing else for the better part of 40 hours. And the chamber around her was emptying now in the slow procedural manner of chambers after long sessions, delegates filing out in clusters, aides gathering materials, the environmental systems cycling towards standby temperature. One of the Rathai block's senior delegates crossed the floor on his way out and stopped beside the platform. He was older, his robes a deep gray with silver threading at the hem, and he carried the measured stillness of someone who had been in this chamber longer than most of the current session's members had been in government. The citations were well prepared, he said. I had time, Sora told him. He made the small forward inclination of his head that indicated, in the Rathai custom, that something had been noted and would be carried forward. Then he moved on without another word. She gathered her notes from the platform surface, the handwritten pages, the margins dense with statute numbers and delegate positions, and the 4 discrepancies she had found in 16 hours of reading in a gallery chair with a cracked tablet and no one to consult. She folded the pages once and put them in her jacket pocket. The assembly hall was nearly empty. Through the glass panels above, the orbital station's running lights were visible in the pre-dawn sky, cool white points against the dark. The 2 warships were still there, in the same positions they had occupied for the past 40 hours, going nowhere. Sarah Vance picked up her tablet and walked toward the exit, and behind her the chamber's main lights descended to standby, and the Star League Assembly's worst 72 hours ended not with a fleet action, not with a formal withdrawal, not with a speech, but with a procedural motion and one standing figure who had simply refused to leave.